In the summer of 2018, a discovery deep inside Washington state's Olympic Mountains uncovered a mystery that investigators still struggle to explain. It began when a group of wildlife researchers hiking through a remote section of the wilderness noticed something unusual among the rocks and dense vegetation. What they found stopped them cold. Human bones. At first, authorities believed the remains belonged to a single missing person. But when search teams returned to the area the following day, the situation became far more disturbing. The mountain was hiding more than one secret. Scattered across the rugged landscape were additional bones, fragments of clothing, a damaged backpack, a cell phone, and a wallet. Then came the shocking revelation. The remains belonged to 3 different people who had vanished years apart. 3 separate disappearances, one isolated location, and no clear explanation for how they all ended up there. Among the victims was 22-year-old Jacob Gray, an adventurous outdoorsman whose disappearance had puzzled investigators for more than a year. What happened to him would eventually become one of the strangest wilderness mysteries in recent memory. To understand the mystery, we need to go back to April of 2017. Jacob Gray wasn't the kind of person who enjoyed sitting still. Raised in Santa Cruz, California, he spent much of his life chasing adventure. He loved the outdoors, lived for exploration, and felt most at home in places where most people would never dare to go. Friends described him as independent, restless, always searching for the next horizon. In early April, Jacob set his sights on one of America's most remote and unforgiving landscapes, Olympic National Park. The region is famous for its breathtaking beauty. Towering mountains rise above endless forests. Heavy fog drifts through ancient trees. Rain falls for much of the year, creating an environment that feels untouched by modern civilization. Nearly all of the park remains pure wilderness. No towns, no roads, no easy way out. For someone like Jacob, it was paradise. On the evening of April 4th, despite cold temperatures and relentless rain, he packed his equipment and began his journey. He traveled by bicycle, towing a custom-built trailer loaded with supplies. Inside were camping gear, food, survival equipment, and a composite hunting bow with several arrows. His destination was deep within the Olympic wilderness. But within days, something went terribly wrong. On April 6th, hikers traveling near the Sol Duque area came across an abandoned bicycle hidden beneath a tarp. Nearby sat a trailer. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. The bike wasn't damaged. The tires were intact. The trailer showed no signs of struggle. Even stranger, nearly all of Jacob's belongings were still inside. It looked less like someone had gotten into trouble, and more like someone had simply vanished. Authorities quickly identified the owner through items found among the gear. The missing person investigation began immediately. Search teams flooded the area. Tracking dogs were deployed. Helicopters surveyed the wilderness from above. Jacob's family rushed to Washington and covered trailheads with missing person posters, hoping someone had seen him. Days turned into weeks. Weeks became months, but the forest gave up nothing. No footprints, no campsite, no clothing, no body. It was as if Jacob had been swallowed whole by the mountains. Eventually, search efforts slowed, then stopped. For more than a year, the mystery remained frozen in time. Many assumed the wilderness had claimed another victim. But in August of 2018, everything changed. A research team working high in the mountains stumbled upon a single human bone. What happened next would uncover one of the most unsettling discoveries ever linked to Olympic National Park. Investigators followed the lead into an isolated alpine region nearly impossible to reach without serious climbing experience. As they pushed deeper into the terrain, a foul odor filled the air. Then they found the source. Human remains, but Jacob wasn't alone. Scattered nearby were bones belonging to 2 other people who had disappeared years earlier. Suddenly, what had begun as a missing person case transformed into something much darker. 3 people, 3 disappearances, 1 remote location, and surrounding all of it were questions nobody could answer. Why had all 3 victims ended up in the same place? Who or what brought them there? And why were strange markers found near both Jacob's abandoned gear and the location of the remains? The deeper investigators looked, the stranger the mystery became. The location where the remains were discovered raised immediate concerns among investigators. This wasn't a place people casually wandered into. The site sat deep within a harsh alpine region more than 6,000 feet above sea level. Reaching it required crossing difficult terrain, steep ridges, and miles of unforgiving wilderness. Even experienced climbers considered the area challenging. Yet somehow 3 different missing people had all ended up there. As forensic teams carefully examined the scene, the mystery only deepened. Among the remains were fragments of clothing, a damaged tent, a backpack, food supplies, and a water filtration system. Most of the items belonged to Jacob, but something stood out. His wallet was still there. Cash remained untouched. Credit cards were still inside. Robbery immediately became difficult to explain. Whoever or whatever had caused Jacob's death hadn't taken anything of value. Then, investigators identified the other 2 victims. The first was Jack Maxim, an experienced hunter who disappeared during a hunting trip years earlier. The second was Diane Bruno, a solo hiker who vanished while exploring the region. Both had disappeared long before Jacob arrived in the Olympic Mountains. Their remains showed signs of having been exposed to the elements for years. Yet somehow all 3 victims were linked to the exact same remote stretch of wilderness. Authorities searched for evidence of human activity nearby. A hidden cabin, an illegal campsite, any indication that someone had been living in the area. They found nothing. No shelters. No structures. No signs of permanent occupation. The mountain appeared completely empty. That realization led investigators to an unsettling question. If nobody was living there, then why were multiple missing people ending up in the same location? And then there were the arrows. When Jacob's bicycle was first discovered, several arrows had been found standing upright in the ground nearby. Now, at the recovery site, investigators found more arrows positioned in a similarly unusual manner. Some believed they could have been trail markers. Others wondered whether Jacob had been trying to leave behind a message. But if that was true, what was he trying to communicate? The answers may have been hidden inside a device recovered near the remains. Jacob's phone. When investigators examined its contents, they uncovered evidence that fueled years of speculation. Among the files was a short video recorded during the final days before his disappearance, only a few seconds long. Yet it became the center of endless debate. The footage appeared to show a large, dark figure standing upright near Jacob's campsite. Motionless. Watching. The image was blurry and distant, far too unclear for any definitive identification. Some dismissed it immediately. Others weren't so sure. Researchers who specialized in unexplained wilderness encounters argued that the figure appeared unusually large and humanoid. To them, it represented possible evidence of something unknown moving through the forest. Skeptics disagreed. They pointed out that poor lighting, distance, and camera quality can easily create misleading images. A tree, a shadow, a bear standing briefly on its hind legs. Any of these explanations could fit the footage. But another discovery added fuel to the mystery. Phone records showed that Jacob had attempted to call emergency services shortly before disappearing. The call never connected. There was no signal. Yet the attempt itself suggested something important. At some point during his final hours, Jacob may have felt that he needed help, desperately. What happened afterward remains unknown. Based on the evidence found along his route, investigators pieced together a possible timeline. Jacob likely traveled by bicycle as far as terrain allowed. When the route became impassable, he concealed the bike and trailer beneath a tarp. He then continued on foot carrying only essential supplies: food, water, shelter, his bow and arrows. At some point, he established a campsite deep in the wilderness. And that's where the mystery truly begins. Imagine the scene. A remote mountain, no nearby roads, no other hikers, no lights. No sounds except wind moving through endless trees. As darkness settled over the forest, Jacob sat alone inside his tent. Then something disturbed the silence. Perhaps it was a sound, a movement, a feeling that someone or something was nearby. Whatever happened that night appears to have frightened him enough to attempt contacting emergency services. But no help came. The mountains remained silent. And sometime after that failed call, Jacob disappeared forever. Whether he became lost, suffered an accident, encountered a dangerous animal, or experienced something far stranger, remains impossible to prove. What investigators did know was this: his remains would eventually be found miles away from where he left his bicycle. His possessions remained largely untouched, and he was not the only missing person connected to that isolated stretch of wilderness. The Olympic Mountains were now hiding 3 unsolved disappearances. But another chilling mystery was waiting thousands of miles away. A case involving a survival expert, a remote corner of Alaska, and a journal filled with terrifying final entries. Unlike Jacob, this man documented his fear as it happened, page by page, day by day, until the writing suddenly stopped. On September 15, 2012, 31-year-old wilderness survival instructor Thomas Seabolt entered one of the most isolated places in North America. The destination was Alaska's gates of the Arctic National Park, a land so vast and remote that entire regions remain virtually untouched by modern civilization. No roads, no cities, no cell service. Just endless mountains, frozen rivers, and millions of acres of wilderness stretching beyond the horizon. For most people, the environment would be overwhelming. For Thomas, it was exactly where he wanted to be. He had spent years mastering survival skills. Friends described him as someone who could endure conditions that would break ordinary people. He knew how to build shelters, find food, navigate difficult terrain, and survive alone in some of the harshest environments on Earth. If anyone could handle the Arctic wilderness, it was Thomas. At first, everything seemed perfect. He documented breathtaking scenery in his journal. Towering peaks covered in mist, crystal-clear streams cutting through untouched valleys, wildlife moving freely across the landscape. His early entries reflected excitement and gratitude. He felt connected to the wilderness, at peace. But that peace would not last. Roughly 2 weeks into the expedition, the tone of his journal changed dramatically. The cheerful observations disappeared. In their place came fear. According to Thomas's writings, something approached his shelter late one night. Something powerful. He described hearing heavy impacts against the structure. Then came a sound that deeply unsettled him, a howl. Not the distant cry of a wolf. Not a bear. At least not anything he recognized. The noise seemed wrong, unnatural, and it left him terrified. Thomas spent the entire night awake, listening, waiting, hoping whatever was outside would leave. The next morning, he abandoned the location. But instead of returning to safety, he continued deeper into the wilderness. At first, he believed changing locations would solve the problem. It didn't. As the days passed, his journal revealed growing paranoia, or perhaps growing awareness. Again and again, he mentioned feeling watched, hearing noises, catching brief glimpses of movement between the trees. Whenever he investigated, there was nothing there. No person, no animal. Nothing he could identify. Then came another disturbing discovery. Large footprints. According to Thomas, they appeared significantly larger than his own. Nearby were strange structures formed from branches and broken timber. Whether they were natural formations or something else remains unknown. But Thomas clearly found them unsettling. The further he traveled, the more convinced he became that something was following him. One journal entry described hearing distant howls echoing through the forest. Another mentioned unexplained sounds moving around his camp after dark. Then came a moment that changed everything. Using his camera, Thomas photographed a dark figure standing far away among the trees. The image was unclear, too distant to identify, but he wrote that it did not resemble any animal he recognized. The figure appeared upright, watching, observing from a distance. Whatever he had captured, it left a powerful impression. Thomas immediately decided to increase his pace and move on. Yet the feeling of being followed never disappeared. Days later, he reached the area around Chandler Lake. Food supplies were running low. Winter conditions were growing harsher. Exhaustion was beginning to take its toll. That evening, he established what would become his final known campsite. As darkness settled across the landscape, Thomas prepared one of his last remaining meals. For a brief moment, perhaps he believed the worst was behind him. Then the sounds returned. Footsteps. Movement outside the tent. The same overwhelming feeling he had described for days. Fear. Raw and immediate. His final known writings painted the picture of a man who believed something was nearby. Something he could neither see clearly nor escape. After that night, the trail ends. When Thomas failed to appear for his scheduled flight home, authorities launched a search operation. Teams spent days combing the wilderness. Eventually, they located a damaged campsite believed to belong to him. Among the scattered items were pieces of torn clothing, a camera, a phone, and his journal. But Thomas himself was nowhere to be found. No body, no confirmed tracks, no definitive explanation. only questions. Investigators reviewed the photographs and journal entries repeatedly. Some believed Thomas had encountered a predator. Others suggested harsh weather, injury, or disorientation may have played a role. A few pointed toward more unusual possibilities. But regardless of the theory, one fact remains unchanged. Nobody knows exactly what happened. Years later, both Jacob Gray's case and Thomas Seabolt's disappearance continue to fascinate researchers, investigators, and mystery enthusiasts alike. Because at their core, these stories tap into something deeply human: the fear of the unknown. The realization that despite our technology, our maps, and our understanding of the world, there are still places where answers simply don't exist. Vast forests, remote mountains, silent valleys untouched by time. Places where a person can vanish and leave behind only fragments of a story. Perhaps one day new evidence will emerge. Perhaps the missing pieces will finally connect. Or perhaps these mysteries will remain exactly where they began, hidden beneath ancient trees, buried among forgotten trails, protected by landscapes that have kept their secrets for centuries. And somewhere out there, beyond the last marked path and the last sign of civilization, the wilderness is still waiting, silent, watching, and refusing to explain what really happened.